One was a baby elephant, left behind when his herd could no longer slow down for him. The other was a newborn zebra, separated from her mother on a morning when the plains gave her no choice. They arrived at the same sanctuary days apart, broken in exactly the same way, not in their bodies, but somewhere deeper. When a keeper named Marcus placed their enclosures side by side, it was the last idea he had left. What happened next is still talked about in wildlife rehabilitation circles today. Drop your city or country in the comments. We love knowing where these stories reach. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, enjoying watching Marcus arrive before sunrise, the way he always did. 15 years of early mornings at Thornfield Wildlife Sanctuary had taught him to read the sounds of each enclosure like a language. What was normal? What was not? That morning, something was different. He stopped outside the shared fence. On one side, a baby elephant stood with his trunk extended through the bars. On the other side, a zebra foal had pressed herself against the barrier. The trunk rested along her neck. Neither had moved from that position since lights out the night before. Marcus stood in the dark for a long time. He had placed their enclosures side by side 11 days ago, the last idea he had after 2 weeks of watching two animals slowly disappear. Now he was standing in the dark, looking at something he did not have the words for yet. To understand what this meant, you need to go back to the beginning. Kibo was born in the dry season on the Kenyan savanna, the youngest calf to a matriarch who had guided her herd through 2 failed rains. He came into the world with a weakness in his front left leg, not severe enough to stop him, but enough to make his pace uneven and his effort more visible. For 2 days, his mother gave him everything she had. She adjusted her position during nursing, steadied him when he stumbled, placed herself between him and the outer edge of the herd's formation. But the 3rd day brought a decision no maternal instinct could override. The water source was 60 kilometers away. The rains had failed again. A pace the herd needed was a pace Kibo could not match. The matriarch moved forward, a little ahead at first, then further. By mid-morning, the distance between Kibo and the last flank of the herd had become something he could not close. Rangers found him the following dawn, beneath an acacia tree, too exhausted to stand. Zara's story began 4 days later, 200 kilometers east. She was born with a malformation in her right hind leg, limiting, but not disabling. Her mother had adapted with patience, positioning herself to absorb the pace difference, choosing routes that favored steadier ground. They had managed for 3 weeks. Then, before dawn, on the 22nd day, the herd scattered. A predator on the plain. In the chaos of movement and noise, the distance between Zara and her mother grew past the point of recovery. Rangers arrived before anything worse happened. Zara was safe. But when the noise stopped and the plane went quiet, what remained was an absence she had no way to name. A ranger named Elias rode beside her in the transport for the entire 4-hour drive to Thornfield. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. Marcus had tried everything. Standard rehabilitation protocols, gradual human introduction, specialized feeding approaches, changes in environment and routine. He had 15 years of experience to draw from, and Kibo and Zara were not responding to any of it. Kibo had refused food since his 2nd day. He pressed against the wall of his enclosure, trunk moving in slow arcs through the air, searching for an absence he could not locate. The sounds he made were low and constant, not distress calls exactly, but in the register below distress, the frequency Marcus associated with animals that had not yet decided whether to keep going. Zara had withdrawn completely. She ate just enough. She stood in the center of her space and allowed the days to pass around. Her grooming stopped. Coat dulling, the particular stillness of an animal that has closed a door inside itself. 2 weeks. Nothing moved. On the 15th day, Marcus moved their enclosures to share a fence. Before we go any further, wherever you are watching this right now, drop your city or country in the comments below. It means something to us to know how far these stories travel. The first morning, nothing happened. Kibo stayed at his far wall. Zara stayed in her center spot. On the 4th morning, Zara walked to the fence. She stood there for a long time. Kibo was watching her from across his enclosure. Then he took one step forward, then another. When he reached the fence, he extended his trunk through the bars slowly, carefully, with the deliberateness of an animal, not entirely sure what it is doing, but going to do it anyway. The tip rested against Zara's neck. She did not move away. Marcus wrote 2 words in his notebook that evening. Still watching. On the 8th day, he arrived to find Kibo rumbling a low sighed. Soft sound. The first voluntary vocalization since the day of his rescue. Zara was pressed against the fence. For the first time since her arrival, she was grooming herself. Marcus wrote a new line. Something is happening. He opened the gate between the enclosures 10 days later. Dr. Nina Cole, Thornfield's chief veterinarian, had real reservations mixing species during vulnerable rehabilitation carried risks. The protocols existed to prevent. She stated them clearly. She also acknowledged that conventional approaches had produced nothing. She approved the gate. What happened when it opened was quiet and unhurried. Kibo crossed the space slowly. Zara watched him come. She did not retreat. When he was close enough, he lowered his trunk and placed it across her back, the same gesture through the fence, but now without bars between them. They stayed like that for almost an hour. When feeding time came, Kibo accepted milk for the first time in 2 weeks. He would not leave Zara's side to do it. He stood with his flank pressed against hers and drank, and she remained still and let him. Marcus stood in the doorway and did not write anything. Some things you just have to let be what they are. Have you ever watched something fall into place, not according to anyone's plan, not by any protocol anyone designed, just fall into place because 2 things finally found each other? Marcus saw it every morning for the months that followed. The weeks that followed built a life neither animal had been able to build alone. Mornings began with Kibo's rumble, a specific sound used only for Zara, lower and softer than any other vocalization, as if created for her and no other purpose. They moved to feeding areas together. Midday brought the mud area, where Kibo distributed cooling mud across Zara's back, and she stayed close to his bulk for shade. Evenings were precise. Zara circled 3 times and settled. Kibo arranged himself beside her, trunk resting along her neck or flank. They slept within touching distance every night. Both animals' recovery tracked alongside their bond, Kibo gaining weight, showing the playfulness of a healthy calf. Zara's coat returned to full condition. The door inside her opened again, slowly and completely. Everything was working, which is exactly when the problem began. 6 weeks after the gate opened, Dr. Cole raised the concern she had been holding since the beginning. A newly arrived orphaned elephant calf named Kofi needed a companion. Standard protocol required introducing Kibo to Kofi. Elephants were deeply social animals whose long-term survival depended on herd integration. Without that foundation, eventual release was close to zero. The introductions were attempted across several weeks. Every one of them failed. When placed near Kofi, Kibo became distressed in a way he showed in no other context and returned immediately to Zara's side. Kofi, sensing the other calf's strangeness, also pulled back. Dr. Cole's position was not wrong. An elephant whose primary bond was with a zebra would never develop the skills required for wild reintegration. The bond was giving Kibo his life back now, but it was also, potentially, sealing a different door. Marcus could not argue with the logic. He also could not unsee what he watched every morning. Then, on a Tuesday, in the 7th month, the questions stopped being theoretical. Zara had been slightly off for several days, appetite low, energy flat. That night, it stopped being subtle. By 4 in the morning, her condition had collapsed. Severe infection, immediate intensive care. She was moved to the clinic before dawn. The separation from Kibo was complete. Within hours, Kibo had stopped eating. By the end of the first day, he was throwing himself against the enclosure wall with a force that left him injured. He did not stop. His distress calls carried across the entire sanctuary, other animals responding, a cascade spreading outward. Dr. Cole followed protocol sedation to reduce the self-harm, maintained separation. The professional judgment that forced separation might allow more appropriate species-specific development to begin. Marcus watched Kibo for 2 days and understood there was not going to be a future if nothing changed. On the 3rd morning, he went to Dr. Cole and asked for one thing. "Let me bring him to her." She agreed, because the alternative was watching Kibo die. What happened when Kibo entered the clinic was immediate. He crossed the room and placed his trunk across Zara's neck, in exactly the position they had held every night for 7 months. His calls stopped. Zara, unconscious for most of the previous day, opened her eyes. Her first sound was faint, barely audible against the equipment. But it was there. Kibo remained through the rest of the day and the following night, careful with the lines and monitors keeping her alive. His own condition stabilized almost immediately. Water. Food. The self-harm stopped entirely. Zara's improvement from that morning was marked. Dr. Cole stood in the doorway on the 3rd day and wrote in her report, "The nature of this bond extends beyond what current veterinary frameworks fully account for." She had been practicing for 15 years. She had never written a sentence like that before. 3 months later, a letter arrived at Thornfield with a government seal. Budget consolidation, 60 days. Merger with 2 facilities to the north. The new operation was optimized for single-species housing at scale. No provisions for mixed-species arrangements. Marcus read the letter. He went outside. He stood beside Kibo and Zara for a while without saying anything. Then he went inside and started making calls. Every facility gave him the same answer. Those equipped for elephants had no provision for zebras. Those with zebras had no infrastructure for a calf Kibo's size. The financial reality of 2 animals with disabilities requiring integrated care outside every standard framework was a number most organizations could not absorb. The deadline reached its 18th day. His phone rang. Owen Grant, retired keeper, 30 years in wildlife conservation, now living on a 20-hectare family property outside the city. He had heard about Kibo and Zara through the informal networks that connect people who have spent their lives working with animals. His offer was simple. The land was his to give. Build the sanctuary there. He said, "Family is not something you are born into. It is chosen, under pressure, when you need it. He had been looking for a reason to use the land for work worth doing. He had found one. 4 months of work followed Dr. Cole volunteering her veterinary services, 3 keepers from Thornfield requesting transfers, local contractors offering materials at cost, people who had never met either animal contributing because the story had reached them. The design incorporated everything Marcus had learned from 8 months of watching the mud features, the water access, the shelter structures, the sleeping area built around one specific nightly ritual that had never varied. By October, it was ready. The transfer came in October. Both animals were calm throughout the calm of animals that have learned to read their keepers closely enough to sense when something is going forward rather than coming apart. When they stepped out onto open ground at Owen's property, the first thing Kibo did was place his trunk along Zara's back. Then they walked forward. The image Marcus carried afterward was the water. Kibo found the pond first and guided Zara toward the edge. They entered together, and then Zara jumped. Not startled, not following Kibo's lead. On her own, a genuine, unprompted leap in the shallows, water scattering around her. The leap of an animal that has arrived somewhere and knows it. Marcus had not seen her move like that since the day she came in. He stood at the water's edge and did not say anything. Some things you do not need to name. Other animals came in the months that followed, young, frightened. The door inside closed. What they found was Kibo. On their first night, he would position himself nearby, not intruding, not pressing, just present, offering the one thing that had worked for him when nothing else had: proximity and patience, and the slow language of an animal that has been where you are. Zara spent time near the most anxious arrivals. No demands, just company. Neither of them had been taught to do this. They had learned it the only way it is ever truly learned, by having needed it themselves. And by not being turned away. A 2023 study in animal cognition confirmed that cross-species emotional bonding in traumatized mammals activates the same neurological attachment pathways as bonds within a species. A 2022 study in applied animal behavior science found that interspecies companionship produced measurably faster physical recovery and lower stress hormones in orphaned wildlife compared to isolated rehabilitation. What Kibo and Zara had was not an anomaly. It was attachment finding the form available to it. Each evening, as the light shifted and the temperature fell, they moved to the large shade trees at the far edge of the property. Zara circled 3 times. Settled, Kibo arranged himself beside her. 2 years had passed since that morning at Thornfield, when Marcus arrived before sunrise and found a trunk extended through a fence in the dark. The world had tried to end this story twice, once when the herd moved on, once when the letter arrived with a government seal. Both times, the story had found a way forward. Not because the world made room for it, because the people around it refused to accept that there was no room. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of a friendship that made no obvious sense but turned out to be the realest thing in the room, leave a comment and tell us about it. Share this with someone who needs a quiet, true story today. Subscribe if you are not already here. There are more of these coming. Every single one is about refusing to let go.